Well, it's an interesting time to be alive, that's for sure. We have been in the middle of some sort of political awakening for more than a decade now. And the latest episode in this is the Thomas Massie election, which he lost yesterday, surprisingly to a lot of people. And I think it was a surprise even to him. He told a USA Today newspaper the night of the election loss that the reason his speech didn't sound like a concession speech is because he simply didn't have one. He really thought he was going to win. I believe he's telling the truth. I talked to him on Saturday. I went to a rally in Florence, and he seemed confident that he was going to win. Of course, it could just be politicians being politicians, feigning confidence to basically inspire people to go vote for a winner or whatnot. It's hard to tell. But I also spoke to people on his staff. Some of them I spoke to off record. I didn't mean to necessarily. I was just kind of getting pizza what there, just chatting. And everyone seemed to think that he was winning, that he was going to win. So this is a huge surprise. Now, there is some who believe that maybe the results aren't legitimate. As far as I know, there hasn't been any real credible evidence to suggest that it's not. I know I saw one of the Kentucky newspapers saying there had been several calls to the Attorney General about election problems and skullduggery and whatnot, and it listed the counties, and most of the complaints are not in any of the counties that are in Massie's district. Now, some would say that obviously it was rigged because there was a foreign lobby that poured, like, I don't know, was it 25 million or something? It's hard to tell how much money they poured into that race. And, that's an argument. It's the same argument, or one of the same arguments that was made when Trump lost in 2020. Now, that election was rigged on many fronts. I spoke to investigators and things like that up in Wisconsin, which was a very huge swing state at the time, or still is. And so there was a lot going on there. But one of the ways that they did rig that election is through propaganda. We know that there was all sorts of suppression and censorship through the media and everything to basically hide the Hunter Biden laptop top story and other things to make Biden more popular and to make Trump look like the bad guy. Now, ironically, it seems like the Trump coalition, maybe, if indeed there is some chicanery there, would be behind us. But again, there is nothing as of now. So let's assume that what happened was legitimate. And so what we have is Thomas Massie losing his race to a phantom empty suit, a warm body, as Trump called him, some guy with no ideas, no convictions of his own, a guy who drew small, uninspired crowds of half asleep people who watch Fox News, a guy whose promise was that he was going to go to Washington and he was going to do what Trump would tell him and what the Republican leaders would tell him. Now, again, assuming these elections this is legitimate, this is astounding. It's also super un-American. He basically told his constituents that he's going to go to D.C., not to obey them, not to put their best interests at the center of his agenda, but those of King Trump and his nobles in Congress. That's essentially what happened. And most astounding is the group of people who seem to have bought this more than any other. And that seems to be the older Americans. The boomers are the only demographic, the 60 plus, 65 plus, who overwhelmingly voted for him. No one else, none of the other voters did. And so basically what they were fooled into believing was that the guy who is the most loyal politician to the same ideas and the principles that the founding fathers put in the Constitution and wanted statesmen to obey by, the same guy who obeys is one of the few guys who obeys this and fiercely does so, is the bad guy. Moreover, it gets crazier. They were convinced that this is the guy who's a rhino and a Democrat and whatnot. Now, keep in mind, these people have sent Thomas Massie to to Congress 7 times before this, and by massive margins. Like, it wasn't even, once he got elected, there was no other race that was close. There wasn't anything like this. But then Trump comes out, he gets mad at him. He gets mad at him because he pointed out the absurdity in some of Trump's policies and ideas, including the massive funding bill, including the fact that he waged a war without constitutional authority, without congressional authority, which was against the Constitution. So Trump decides that I want to get rid of this. And he starts calling him a rhino. I remember when that happened, and I believe I may have even done a story surrounding something like that. And the weird thing about it is I didn't think anyone would believe that, because it was obviously so absurd. But obviously they did, because there's lots of comments of people believing that, lots of comments on social media and things like that of people who actually believe that he's a rhino. And some of these comments are from people that I know personally, who I've met, and so they're not just bots. There are people who believe this absurdity. And what's weird about that is that the Republican platform vows, among many things, that a fidelity to individual liberty, to privacy, to constitutional fidelity, and to basically the right of the individual, right? Whether it is to sell meat without having to jump through 1,000 regulatory hurdles, or buy milk, raw milk, because Massey's a big proponent of raw milk. We like raw milk or whatever. It's like, there's all these ways that the government has its tentacles in our lives, and it makes our lives harder. And he was the guy who actually tried to untangle, to loosen the grips of the federal government's tentacles on it. He was the guy who was pointing out when power, no matter which party from, overstepped their boundaries. And for that, he was labeled a rhino, and then people believed it. And so this is concerning in some way. Now, what's not concerning is the fact that it seems like we do have a generations coming up that understand what's happening here. They do seem to embrace the ideas of liberty more than the older generations. And assuming we can get to that point, to this future where those people are in charge, then maybe we have a bright future ahead. But it's very questionable what the world is going to look like by the time those people become the major voting bloc. I had a thought last night as I was watching Massey's concession speech, and me and my wife were kind of, we were kind of down a little bit, as a lot of people were about this. And I had this thought about the Bible story where the Israelites were roaming in the desert, and God had promised them this promised land, which eventually they did get to. But remember what happened. God actually waited for the generation of grumblers who had come out of Egypt to die off. This was a generation that either wanted to stay in the desert or to go back to slavery. It sounds absurd, but you could draw parallels between the absurdity and the crazy lack of rationale that we have among people who would believe that Thomas Massey is a rhino, that he's the bad guy. So we have this, we have a huge problem that I think has been created for various reasons. I did a previous video about why boomers are so susceptible to deception and lies. And I believe what I said was something along the lines like, this is one of the main points, was that this is a generation that has been stewing in lies and propaganda for most of their lives. While I'm Gen X guy, and so I was growing up right when the internet came up, so I know what the world was like before that and afterwards. So I've seen both sides. And so the way that the world was before that, as you don't have to necessarily grow up to have known that, but the media was very curated and very controlled, because it's not like today where anyone can have a podcast or this Substack and pay $1,000 in a microphone and a camera and a computer or whatever, and you can sit here and rant and have a few people listen to you, whatever. That wasn't the world. Basically, there was a script, and the people with the cameras and the microphones had lots of money, and they were the only ones who got to broadcast the script. So you had to follow the script, or basically you had no platform. I mean, there were some fringe elements. There were others who smaller magazines and whatnot, including the John Birch Society and the New American, which I'm a senior writer at and whatnot, and they have existed since the 1950s, and they got a lot of crap for a long time, and the media just dumped on them for a long time. And so a lot of people, when they hear that name, if they've ever heard it before, sometimes they'll think bad, things that aren't untrue. And the reason for that is because the media just piled on them because they were not approved. Well, okay, so that's the world that the boomers grew up in. And it created, a hardened in them certain elements and certain beliefs that seem to have hold up no matter what happens. It's the only way I can think of why they would believe the lies that they do. This is the same group of people who overwhelmingly support foreign wars when it's clear that it's a racket, that they lie to us about why they're partaking, and they're the only ones who believe the official story. There's a naivety and a gullibleness and among this generation that is destructive. That's not, and again, like I said in my video, that doesn't mean that everyone is like that. There's always large exceptions to the rule, if you want to call this a rule, to the trend and whatnot. I happen to work with a lot of boomers, again, but I run in a unique circle, who are very red-pilled, who are like the original gangsters of conspiracy and red-pilldom and New World Orderism. Like, that's where these guys came from. But again, that's a very small group of people. So I don't know if we have enough time to get to this bright future where the boomers are no longer the major voting bloc. They've passed, and now we have an American electorate that is hardened by some of the hardships that we're beginning to experience, that are probably only going to get worse, because there's a few looming disasters, very possible. First of all, I think the most likely one is financial collapse. We are $38 trillion, or we are 39, I don't know where we are anymore, but we have surpassed 100% of GDP in debt. Okay, this is not going to go forever. The only reason it has gotten this ridiculous to this level is because we are the world's reserve currency. That is the only reason, and this will not go on forever. And if we have a financial collapse, it could cause all sorts of unrest. It can crumble all sorts of institutions, and it could lead to national collapse where, maybe America breaks off into a few republics here and there. There's no telling what can happen. We are subsumed by by a larger supranational organization, where basically then our sovereignty as a nation disappears. And if that happens, then it doesn't matter necessarily what the people want. Just kind of like it doesn't necessarily matter as much now, but it does to some degree. I mean, there's still a struggle there, and it's worth being involved in. It's worth participating in. Another threat that's looming is that of a digital prison. They're building it as we speak. Catherine Austin Fitts is a very good source for this, from the way they're surveilling and manipulating us through technology, their attempt and agenda to employ digital currency that then they can shut off whenever you tick them off or whatnot. AI is kind of within this realm here, this threat, whatever. If AI does indeed start wiping out jobs, it kind of already has started doing that. That's going to cause some issues. So this is another threat. Another one that the globalists seem to be pushing is that of nuclear warfare. The war in Ukraine is still still raging. Apparently, Ukraine is making a few comebacks here and there. Russia's getting ticked. They've been going at this for 4 years. Europe is pushing for a war. It appears to be that they're pushing for a war with Russia, and that could lead to an exchange, a nuclear exchange. France has nuclear arms, nuclear weapons, as does the UK and whatnot. So there's no telling where that happens. And all this can lead to all this unrest, or virus can upend everything. And it could all lead to, some sort of system where the saviors will come and they're going to offer us, food and security for enlisting in their little world government and whatnot. All this is very plausible. It's very possible this will come if we do not get this under control. And I think the people who are running things, they know that the future, as far intellectually, is not in their favor. They see people awakening. They see people realizing that we've been lied to for a century. They recognize the danger of the Federal Reserve, of endless wars, of foreign lobbies influencing our politicians, of the corruption and the sociopathic nature of our politicians and of our leaders. They're opting out of the two-party system. All of that is happening. They know their time is running out. The question is, will they allow us to get to a future that is brighter? And obviously, I don't know. If someone tells you they know, they don't know. Obviously, only God himself knows. Which brings me to the solution. There's the biblical, the Old Testament verse from 2 Chronicles 7, and lots of evangelicals have circulated this, and I think it applies because I think it speaks to God's nature. And so this applied to Israel at the time, and I think his people today are Christians. Christians are his people. That's what the Grace Covenant, that's what Jesus did. He came and he basically, he fulfilled the law, and he made his people Christians. And so we are still considered a Christian nation. I think, to whatever degree that's true, the Christians in this nation are very, very weak and intellectually ignorant on a lot of things. But nevertheless, fortunately for us, God's grace and salvation does not rest on how ignorant or how smart we are about most things. Our salvation is based on our repentance and belief unto him as Lord and Savior. So, with that being said, I think there are a lot of people in this country who are in fact Christians. And what 2 Chronicles 7 says is that if my people, which are called by my name, humble themselves, and they pray and they seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, and I will forgive their sin and will heal their land. Now, there's a lot in that verse, and I don't want to necessarily get into it, especially about turning from their wicked ways. Maybe people will say, well, what are you talking about? Well, I think if you look around and you see that we have a government that goes around bombing the crap out of the whole world, that has caused so much chaos, that our leaders are literally pedophile protecting Satanists, I think you have to come to the conclusion that this is a wicked nation in a lot of ways. And Christians have let this happen. So Christians need to come together, and we need to petition God that he preserve this country and that he save this country, and that we can get to a future that is better, that is more aligned with God's will for America. America was founded by mostly Protestants, but overwhelmingly Christians, like 99% Christians, right? I mean, that was, that's undisputable. And it was blessed because of that. And no one could look at what's happening today to this country and say that we are still being blessed. You cannot look at the metrics, the trajectory, the depreciating standard of living, this debt that we have, the fact that we're just warmongering all the time. This is not the same nation that the founders put into motion. It's not the same nation that existed throughout the entire 19th century. And it's not even the same country it was 50 to 60 years ago. It's a very different country. It's a more decadent country. It's a far less Christian country. And it is a country that has been targeted for destruction. And the only thing that can save this country is God.